Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for attending our Black Masculinity Reimagined workshop or training. We'll get started here in about 3 or 4 minutes, just giving people time to log in and register and figure out any technical issues that they may have. But thank you all so much for attending.
Well, you gave me no heads up before you started the broadcast. You know, I get a chance to fix my face.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Hey, you know what they say. You know what they say. Stay ready. You know what they say.
You know what?
For a coach used to tell it, stay ready. You ain't got to get ready.
You know your fresh fade. You've been on with your fresh fade today. I just want to say that.
I have. I need to bring it back. I need to reel it back in.
People get haircuts and they start thinking they're better than the rest of us who can't cut our hair. You know what I mean? I'm feeling like there needs to be an ism, haircutism, something. That's what I'm feeling in this space.
Haircutism. Oh man, it is a thing. I ain't gonna lie.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, I feel like a new person. All right. So for everyone in attendance right now, I would love to hear if this is your first time with us, or if you've attended a Black Masculinity Reimagined workshop, so before with us and you're returning. So if you would, on the right-hand side of your screen, there should be a panel, a control panel. So there's a question, so you can type in your question there, and you can say if this is your first time or if you've come to one or two before, just to get a sense of who we have online with us today. If you don't have audio, you may check. There should be like a little phone widget, and check and see if you're on computer audio or phone audio, or if you're clicked on to no audio. We usually suggest perhaps joining the phone call so that you can hear, because sometimes the computer audio can be a little iffy, a little sometimes. All right. Nice. Hello, first timers. Okay, we got an OG.
OG's in the house.
Got some OG. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. You please correct me. Selassie Dotse, her third time attendance. She's an OG. So sorry if I mispronounced your name. Please correct me next time. Perfect. Thank you. All right, maybe 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. All right.
Ready to get started?
Okay. I think let's make it happen. Okay, so thank you everyone again so much for attending our Black Masculinity Reimagined workshop on masculinity and mental health 101. My name's Leroy, mental health and masculinity trainer here with Beam. Also have Yolo on the call. Yolo, you want to say what's up?
What's up? I'm Yolo, and I'm on the call.
Also great. As well, we have two ASL interpreters with us. We have MJ Jones here and Shannon Morrison. They will be here to facilitate ASL to support in that manner. So, in saying that, when we're speaking, if we're going to have a lot of dialogue today, so if you would be very mindful when you are speaking to maybe tone it down one notch, slow it down one notch to ensure that MJ and Shannon have time to do their interpretation. Okay, so thank you all again for attending our workshop today. We're going to be talking about masculinity, mental health 101. Before we get started, what we like to do, like to give everyone an understanding of who we are at Beam, especially for those of you with your first time attending one of our webinars. So about Beam, so we're a national training, movement building, and grant making organization dedicated to the healing, wellness, and liberation of Black and marginalized communities. A lot of the work that we do, really all of the work that we do, our namesake is inspired by pro-feminist activist Joseph Beam. Joseph Beam was a beam of light, so to speak, for people living with HIV and AIDS, especially Black gay men living with HIV/AIDS in the 1980s. Joseph Beam really gave voice or amplified the voices of those experiences. And so the things that we do here, everything that we do, we want to emulate Joseph Beam and live and show up in the ways in which Joseph Beam did. Our mission statement is to remove the barriers that Black people experience, getting access to or staying connected with emotional health care and healing. And we do this through healing justice-based organizing, education, training, grant making, and advocacy. We want to center holistic healing, so emotional healing, mental healing. We really want to center that to support with the liberation of Black folks. So how do we do this? So we do this, one, by training in the community. We train educators, activists, barbers. We understand that people are in different places with their journey to healing. People, they're in their own process, they're in their own journey. So we want to ensure that, if a person doesn't have the capacity to attend a Beam workshop, if they may go to the barber shop, or they may just talk to a friend, wherever they're at in the community as a whole has the resources, has the knowledge, and can provide support for people to get the resources necessary for them to practice emotional health, mental health, and for them to heal. Grant making, community organizing. So we understand that the work doesn't start with Beam and it doesn't end with Beam. So that's why we are very intentional about supporting the work that is done wherever Black healing is centered. We want to support that work, and organizational wellness and coaching. So, we can be doing all this great work in the community, but then someone may go to their job and have their experience as a Black person not be centered, be stigmatized, and be put down. That can be very hard. So we want to ensure that whatever space we are in, whether it be at a job, whether it be at school, wherever that is, that there are that Black healing is centered, and that is seen through how valuable it is. Okay, so this is Black Masculinity Reimagined. So what we do here, we're a community building initiative. We really explore the intersection of of male socialization, mental health, and community violence. We do this work with black men, boys, and all masculine individuals to one identify and apply skills to address toxic masculinity, male privilege, and a lot of the isms that and stigma that comes with mental health, sexual, and domestic violence. We want to model and produce behaviors. So what we want to do is we want to provide you all with skills to practice this. It's one thing to know the theory behind what we're talking about, but it's another thing to do it, and that's what we want to focus on. We want to focus on the doing. So we're going to provide you with tools, skills to have conversations so we can model and produce this outside, because the work is with ourselves and the work is in the community. And third, we want to build accountable communities and networks. We want to norm. We want to norm anti-sexist, anti-transphobic, anti-patriarchal beliefs and behaviors. We want there to be a community where those isms aren't accepted, and healing, being emotionally aware, is and being accountable where that's centered, that's promoted, that's normalized. Okay, so this work is supported by the New York Women's Foundation. It's supported by Blue Shield of California, supported by the Women's Foundation of California. They believe in the work that we're doing. We're so grateful to them that they are investing in us to do this work that's so vital for all of us. So shout out to them, big shout out to them for doing this work. And together today, what we're going to do, just want to take everyone through what we're going to be doing, what everyone can expect. So today, first, what we're going to do is we're going to better understand mental health, healing justice, and how mental health shows up in our communities. Two, we're going to examine the relationship between traditional ideas of masculinity and mental health. And then three, in our name, but we are going to explore a reimagination of mental health and masculinity within our communities. We're going to go into depth with each three of these more so as we continue, but this is just to give you an introduction to what we're going to be doing together in this space. All right, Yellow.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Leroy, for getting us started. Hi, everyone. Like Leroy said earlier, my name is Yolo, and I'm going to take us into our next portion of our workshop, which is something we call container building. Container building is something we do to ensure that as we get ready to have a very engaging dialogue, and many of you were here last week, or the last session, and we talked a lot. We're going to talk a lot today. And so before we do that, we'd like to make sure we establish some things up front in terms of how we're going to set the bar for how we engage and show up in honor and dignity with each other. So the first thing I want to make sure I invite folks to do is, this is a virtual webinar, so we know people are maybe driving, maybe maybe sitting, maybe standing, whatever. I want to invite you wherever you are, however, whatever space you're in, to just maybe take a moment and just get present with your physical body, right? A lot of us are staring at screens all day, right? We're staring at screens all day, people talking to us, but we're not always somatically aware. And so I just want to invite you to we're going to take like a 20-second pause, and we're just going to just pay attention to our breath into our body. You can and I invite you to put things down there in your hand, maybe just stop, and it's going to take a second, okay? All right. So thank you for those who chose to join me in that sacred pause. You'll probably see us do that throughout the course of our workshop time together. It's really about taking the time to stop, right? Capitalism, systems are always telling us to go, go, go. How do we take a moment to pause, to be present with what's going on within us, within our bodies? That is a critical part of our healing and our intervention and our accountability work, right? Connecting with ourselves. So I'm going to take us now through our container building. First thing I want to say is, we ask people when we speak today, we invite people to share their name, but also share their pronouns. So for example, my name is Yolo. My pronouns are he, him, and his. just so when we get in conversation, we can make sure we are addressing people correctly. So that's one thing we want to invite folks to do because we're going to have a lot of discussion today. Next slide, Leroy. Thank you. All right. So just a quick note on COVID-19. I want to be very clear and upfront with you all who are on the call that all the resources and things we are sharing today, we share within the context of this pandemic. And we recognize and we want to hold that we're in a moment of great distress for many people as it comes to relates to community violence, right? A lot of our community partners like Reframing, who support survivors of sexual and domestic violence, have talked about how the increasing calls, the increasing need because many people are isolated in unsafe spaces. And so the work that we do today is not just theoretical, it is an opportunity for us to take it and apply it to ourselves as well as to the folks that are in our families and communities in terms of how we reframe understandings of masculinity, about what that means to be in the world, which is often so deeply wedded to violence. It's about having these conversations and sharing these tools, because everything we share with you, we want you to share with your folks and have conversations about so that we can begin the continue the ongoing process of trying to address and circumvent the violence and harm that's happening in our communities, often in the name of maleness or masculinity. And so trying to subvert that and amplify the qualities and traits that do not do that, right? And so that is a part we just want to make sure we're very clear with framing that up front. Next slide, please, Leroy. To our allies. So first of all, to our allies who are here who are not Black folks, we want to welcome you. We're so grateful that you are here and chosen to be present in solidarity with us. We also want to name, to be very clear, that this is a space that centers Black lives. And when we say Black lives, we mean Black folks who are heterosexual, who are gay, who are trans, who are Muslim, Christian, disabled. We hold space for all of us, and we're going to challenge ourselves consistently to continue to expand our understandings of what all the beauty and power that Blackness encompasses. When we say Black, we do not mean African American. Many of us have diverse Black backgrounds, so we're Afro-Caribbean folks, African folks. We're naming that Blackness is not monolithic, nor is it dominated by African American perspectives. So I just want to name that. Welcome, allies. We're so grateful you're here. Our focus is centering Blackness. We encourage you to be present with that. And that is our work today. All right. So I have a big belief, nothing without intention, right? You know, that's something people may be familiar with from Solange, right? And so what I like to open up our space with is we're about to spend the next hour and a half, almost 2 hours together. What's your intention for being here? Like, why are you here? You know, like what do you hope to get out of this conversation? What do you hope to contribute? And so what I want to invite folks is that in the chat box that you have on your control panel, you have an opportunity in the question box. You can type in what your intention is for your space. And Leroy and I can lead with sharing our intention. And then hopefully we will invite you all to kind of share, because we want those intentions to stay centered, so that as we're talking about these difficult and nuanced topics, you're keeping that intention like, wait, why did I come here? What is my purpose for being here today? And how can I take this and grow this intention? So I'll start. My intention today is to craft some space for us to have a reframing of how we understand mental health, of how we see the linkages between mental health and sometimes unhealthy and toxic ideas of masculinity, how we see that creating harm, but also seeing reimagining possibilities, right? And so when I want to expose the link between the kind of the current harm that's happening, but also help us reimagine and amplify the things that we're doing that are not perpetuating harm, that are creating nourishment and enrichment in our communities. And so that's my intention. So those two pieces. Leroy, would you like to share yours?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Yolo. Yes, Leroy, he, him, his. My intentions today, one is to be authentic. And to help create authentic spaces. And then three, just help facilitate and work with everyone to reimagine what mental health is, and just understand the idea of wholeness and how we can act and how we can show up for ourselves to be whole in ourselves with each other.
Ashe. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. So what I want to invite folks to do, so we have you hear from me and Leroy in terms of what we're trying to hold in the space. We want to hear from you. So in your chat box, you have an opportunity to type in. I'm going to start reading them out. Once again, if at any time that your name is not pronounced correctly, please correct us. As someone who has a rather, quote unquote, what Americans might say unusual name. I very much so feel it is important to have your name pronounced correctly. So I encourage you not to feel uncomfortable to say, hey, YOLO, that is not how my name is said. All right. So I have some intentions here. Nakisha says learning from a different perspective is an intention. Ashe, I'm affirming that. Yoli says want to shout out Danilo. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm gonna shout out Danilo. Okay. Tyrone says my intention for being here today is to better understand my own masculinity as a gay black man. Excuse me. Ashe, thank you for being here, Tyrone, and sharing. Rose says, intention is to being able to learn more to share with my Black and Brown clients and to support their empowerment. Ashe, thank you for being here, Rose. Kendall says, my intention is to be vulnerable and truthful and to learn better how to be present for and rebuild trust with Black men and Black masculine folks. Ashe, I hear that, holding that in the space. Thank you, Kendall. Melanie shares that intention for Melanie is to understand how to best address mental health concerns of Black male-identified people and my mental health practice. Ashe, affirming those pieces. So we'll hopefully bring some pieces to that. I know that one thing I like to be very clear about too is that Leo and I bring our insight, our experience. However, everybody in this room has brilliance and insight and wisdom. And so this is a collaborative learning experience. We're going to learn from you. You're going to teach us some things. We're going to hopefully share some things together. So thank you for everyone who shared their intention. And then I have one last one from Adam who says, intention for Adam is to continue to dismantle regressive ideas of masculinity. Ashe. All right. Wait, I want one more, Leroy. I'm going to read this last one. I'm sorry. Danilo. Oscar says, continue deconstructing and decolonize toxic masculinity and to learn more about mental health for myself, my family, and also says, thank you, Yoli. Yoli is Danilo's sister, and Oscar invited her. So, yay, awesome. We love to hear their family folks in the room, inviting family. That's awesome. We love that. Thank you all for sharing your intentions. We are holding those intentions as we move through this work today. We're going to center those pieces. I want to invite you once again to keep them in your heart, keep them in your focus. And thank you so much for sharing. All
right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So we have some shared understandings in order to hold, in order to value, in order to honor everybody's intentions. We want to have some shared understandings, some shared agreement, if you will, about how we're going to show up in our space during this time together. So the first one, our first shared understanding is take space and make space. So take space. We want you to speak your truth. Want you to be authentic. We want this to be a very collaborative, very engaging space. But then at the same time, we want everyone to make space. It's important for us to understand that, there are voices in the audience that have traditionally been silenced. There hasn't been space made for other folks. And so, just understanding that, acknowledging that, and, if I may have spoken for 3 or 4 slides in a row, perhaps making space, taking a step back to make space for someone else. Second one, why am I talking? So again, as Yolo said, we work with intention. Everything that we do is with intention. So when we speak, we want you to share, and we also challenge you to speak with intention. Really think about what it is that you're saying. Think about, am I addressing a behavior or am I making an assumption or an assertion about somebody else? Okay, we want to speak in I statements, which we kind of got to, all right, but, being really intentional about what we're talking about is crucial. So 3, brave space. We say brave space, because in order for a space to be safe, there's work that needs to be done. That's why we're doing this container building. The space, safety takes action. It takes trust, and that has to be built up over a certain amount of time. These shared understandings are a way for us to create that trust so that safety can be established. But in the between time, we invite everyone to be brave and speak the truth in this space. 4, use I statements. So I never want to assume someone else's perspective, assume someone else's experience. I want to speak from my own. And then if someone can resonate with that, if that connects to someone, then we'll make space. We'll make space for them to share. All right, but ensuring that we're using I statements. And then again, be mindful of boundaries. Okay, we want everyone to take care of themselves, in this space when we're together. Understand, you don't have to, it's okay. You don't have to give it all right? If you can just give what you feel safe with, give what you feel comfortable with, and that's okay in this space. Okay, so our core assumptions. Everything that we do here with Beam, with Black Masculinity Reimagined, we have these 4 core assumptions. These are things we live by. This is what we do, why we do, how we do. Okay, so the first one, our first core assumption is everyone has imminent value. Okay, what does this mean? This means that you just being here, me just living, me just breathing, me just being a person means that I have imminent value. That means that I deserve dignity, I deserve respect. It is my birthright. Okay, so when we approach everyone, when we look at everyone as having imminent value, that allows us to empathize with them. That allows us to create space for understanding because we see this person has value. So how do I better understand them? How do I better meet them where they're at? How do I empathize with them? All right, so that's our first core assumption. Yolo, you want to talk about the second one?
Sure. Second one, briefly, I'll say is in the context of our work together today, there might be times people might say things that come off maybe problematic or maybe rub us the wrong way. And so I want to invite us, as me and Leroy will practice, to address behaviors, ideas, and choices and not the core of people. It's the difference between saying, Leroy, you are something, like say, Leroy, you are homophobic versus saying your idea that you presented is homophobic, right? So giving people the grace and the space to understand that we are not our behaviors, ideas, and choices. However, we are responsible for them and their impact, right? And so creating a little bit of that space for us to begin to continue the work with curiosity and kindness and tenderness as much as possible for these difficult, sometimes challenging topics.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yolo. Thank you. And so that goes into 3, our third core assumption. Everyone has learned isms and privilege. What Yolo said, it's not constructive for him to say, Leroy, you are sexist, you are misogynistic, you are homophobic. We all have imminent value. We all have value in ourselves. And we live in a society that was founded on misogyny, that was founded on violence, that was founded on racism, that was founded on sexism. And us surviving, us growing up in this environment, there are going to be things that we pick up along the way. And me just being a man, for instance, there are certain privileges that there are certain privileges that are going to be placed upon me. And there are privileges that I'm going to exercise. So it's not fruitful. It's not fruitful for me to say, am I misogynistic? Am I sexist? What's more important, what we think is a more fruitful conversation and gives us that gap, that opportunity for conversation to come to better understanding, is saying instead, where is the misogyny, where's the sexism, where's the racism showing up in my behavior? And then more importantly, when it does show up, what am I doing? How am I learning? How am I redirecting and changing my behavior so it doesn't show up like that anymore? Okay, so just keeping that in mind when we're talking about our third core assumption. Yellow, you want to talk about the fourth one?
Sure. Fourth core assumption is our feelings are valid even if the ideas informing those feelings may be inaccurate or on whole. So, for example, my feeling of anger or my feeling of sadness is a valid feeling for me on a somatic, psychic, emotional level, right? It's legitimate. However, the story I may be telling myself that may be cultivating that sadness, the story I might be telling myself about my worth, about my value, about how people treat or see me, the story may not be accurate. It may not be the full round story. And so sometimes we have to really kind of hold the narrative and the feeling and kind of pull out those distinctions and recognize that no matter what kind of context we're in, the feeling is always something we have to hold space for. Sometimes before we get to the core of the ideological argument or the ideas around it. Because when we approach the ideas without dealing with the emotional propulsions behind the ideas, we sometimes miss out on an opportunity to build connection, but also understanding where someone is coming from or what's driving that particular stance. So really it's a space where we're going to honor all of our feelings, even when they're uncomfortable, not just the yummy, good feelings, quote unquote, but all the feelings that are all information, all things that we can learn, that can teach us things about our internal and external life as we get connected with them.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So speaking of feelings, and I think this exercise, we do this at every exercise, every Black Masculinity Reimagined workshop. We do this feeling wheel. I think it's especially pertinent or useful here when we're talking about mental health. The feelings wheel. So the feelings wheel is developed by Dr. Gloria Wilcox. It's a way for us to identify what it is that we're feeling. If you notice in the center, you have some core foundational feelings such as being mad, sad, scared, joyful, peaceful, powerful. And then for the secondary and third levels, there's more nuance, more descriptive emotions that that are where those emotions come from. They're founded in those core emotions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get in touch with our feelings. We're going to practice that right now. All right. So with this feelings wheel, it's important to know that many people, especially masculine folks, were taught to disconnect from our emotions. We're taught that if we do get in touch with our emotions, that could actually be harmful. That could be dangerous for us. And we were taught that our emotions aren't valuable, that they don't teach us anything. Well, here at Black Masculinity Reimagined, we don't buy into that at all. In actuality, our emotions, they are an essential part of who we are as dynamic beings. Our emotions tell us where it is that we're at, and there are keys to let us know what it is that we need in that moment. All right, so what we're going to do right now, is we're going to get in touch and we're going to name what it is that we're feeling in this moment. Okay, so we want everyone to look at their feelings wheel. If you look in the control panel, there is it should say attachments or handouts. There is a feelings wheel in there that you can look at if this isn't big enough for you to look at. And we want everyone to name what they're feeling in this moment. Okay, and then we want everyone to name where they're feeling it in their body. Some helpful tips. Feelings are often one word. So a lot of times when someone may ask us, how are you feeling? We may go into this narrative. I may say, oh, well, I went to the store, then this happened, and this person said this, and I felt some type of way about that. But in all actuality, I'm not naming my feeling. I'm giving a narrative. So it's really important that we name what it is that I'm feeling. It's important that I name what it is I'm feeling so that I can get and understand what it is that I need in the moment. Okay? And oftentimes, it's actually very important as well to name where we're feeling it in our body. Our body is telling us something. A lot of times, they say if you're feeling a lot of pain and tension in your shoulders, that means that maybe you're carrying too much, or you feel pain in your lower back because you're bending over backwards too much, and you may be exhausted from that. So naming where we're at, naming one, what we're feeling, and naming two, where we're feeling it in our body. So we encourage you, we invite you, take some time right now to look at your feelings, get in touch with yourself. And in your chat box, if you would, please name one, what you're feeling, and two, where you're feeling it in your body.
Leroy, I can read these out for us. Thank you for that setup with everyone. So for those who would like to share, this is once again, what Leroy is saying, this is a check-in. This is a part of the work, right? The practice of getting reconnected, of staying in connection. So sharing, and if you don't know what you feel, that's okay too, right? So not knowing is also information. It can say, I'm not sure how I feel. Okay, that's good information. Maybe you only know a sensation. Maybe you're like, I just feel tension in my stomach, or I just feel, but I don't have a feeling word for it. That's okay. We're just providing opportunity before we get ready to go into this deeper conversation for us to check in with our emotional, sensory, somatic self and what's going on in there. All right. So I see from Tyrone. Tyrone says, I'm feeling thoughtful. Thank you, Tyrone. Oscar says, feeling at peace, love, thankful, and Oscar's feeling it in their chest and head. And Tyrone says, Tyrone is feeling it in my core. Melanie says feeling creative, hopeful in the core, the belly, the third chakra, LOL. So you're giving us all the chakras and stuff, Melanie. Giving us a deeper understanding. Thank you. Ang says, I'm feeling relaxed in my chest. I'm feeling relaxed in my chest. Kendall says, I'm feeling aware and serene, and I'm feeling it behind my ears. Interesting. Thank you, Kendall. Darren says, I'm feeling peaceful, and I'm feeling it in my forehead and in my third eye. And Kendall, another person named Kendall, says, I'm not sure how I feel, particularly, but I feel a tightness in my shoulders and neck. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's such an important piece because sometimes we don't know how we feel, but our body's telling us something, right? So it's like, what is our body trying to communicate? And we might not know that immediately. It takes some time to process and move through that, which is a part of just being human, right? Thank you, Kendall, for sharing that. Then I have Christian. Hi, Christian. Christian says, Christian's feeling anxious and noticing that in my trap and feeling curious. Christian, is that right? Is it my trap and feeling curious? Trapezoid. Oh, gotcha. Got trapezoid. Okay, I was there you go. Thank you. So feeling that and feeling curious. Thank you, Christian. I was like, you feeling it in the trap? I was like, bees in the trap? You know, the Nicki Minaj saying bees in the trap. I went to different place because I wasn't raised right. So, you know, I went to different place. No, thank you for sharing, Christian.
There he goes. There he goes.
Okay, thank you for everybody who shared. Any last folks want to share what they're feeling, what's coming up for them? And while people might be typing, I want to also offer, we do this in the beginning. We want you to pay attention to this throughout because we're about to talk about a lot of intense subject matter. Check in with yourself. We'll remind folks to check in because things will be awakened, things will be activated, right? So it's kind of cultivating a little body awareness is always a great thing that we can use anyway, you know? All right, last one I see here from Janice, and Janice says, I'm feeling full, aware, and serene. All right, awesome. Thank you, Janice, for rounding us off. Thank you, everybody, for sharing and checking in. This tool as a handout, of course, is something you can download. We invite you to use this not only with yourself to check in every day, but also with your family and community members. It's a great tool for young people in your life, young men or masculine folks, or just people in your life, to really help us cultivate emotional literacy because when we get more emotional literacy, that muscle, as it becomes stronger and we build it, it helps us navigate some of the things we have to process throughout our lives, right? We'll talk a little bit later about how, you know, a lot of Black people in general, we experience so much distress and trauma, but then we also receive little guidance or tools to help us process that trauma, right? And so this emotional literacy, this feelings wheel is a small tool to offer. So like, if we have more tools to help us process and move through it, maybe it will help us be able to navigate it in ways that we can cope indifferently than as opposed to being so bombarded by, not bombarded, but like can help us navigate and cope and just navigate it better, if that makes sense, differently, if that makes sense. So we'll talk more about that more specifically going forward, but I'll let you take us away, Lou. Thank you for everyone for sharing.
Thank you, everyone. Awesome.
I should say this one too. Sorry, my bad. Yeah. Sorry. So there's another last piece I was supposed to say. So managing comfort. If anytime you feel uncomfortable in this session, we want to invite you to take care of yourself. Get up, get a drink, take a walk, do whatever you need to do. You know, we often encourage us to kind of ask ourselves, what is my discomfort telling me that I need, right? What is it? Is this an opportunity to grow? Are you seeing yourself reflected in the work and being like, ooh, maybe that reflects that behavior that time I wasn't quite showing up in integrity or showing up in dignity? We want to invite you to be present with that, but take care of yourself as you need as well. All right?
Yeah. And just adding on to that, YOLO, you know, a lot of times we may feel uncomfortable, we may feel an emotion, and we automatically think, oh, that's bad. I need to get out of that space. I need to not feel this emotion. But it's okay. You know, it's important for us to make space for that emotion. Just feel it and really listen to it. Be in touch with it, because then again, that can allow us to see. That's our body telling us, you know, that's our body telling us that. So just sitting with that emotion, not saying it's good or saying it's bad, just it's something that I'm feeling in this moment. Being in touch with that, and then again, learning, saying, what can I learn from this? What is this telling me?
And you know, Lee, one person will add to that, because I know a lot of folks on the call who are people who support a lot of folks. I know a lot of us may preach this a lot, but we don't always practice it. particularly when we're supporting
Mhm.
folks that we care about or in community. So being mindful that, like, yes, this is the work that we have to apply to ourselves as caretakers, as nurturers, facilitators, teachers, activists. We have to also be mindful of that, because if we're not, when we're not mindful of that, we see how it contributes to our own unwellness, our own lack of sustainability of our movements, of our community spaces. And so prioritizing and saying that whatever we're feeling is important is also a practice that many of us who are in those kind of helping professions have to redirect ourselves to, because we're often so external focused. So keeping that in mind as we move to the work for those folks in the room who might be, that might be a part of your journey.
Amen. Amen. All right.
Um, so as we move through our conversation today, we're centering Black masculine folks. When we say Black masculine folks, we do not mean Black men. We do not mean Black cis men. We do not mean only Black trans men. We do not mean not only Black able-bodied men. We're talking about a variety of different experiences, and we're going to have a lot of nuanced conversation about the unique ways in which mental health as a construct flows within people of different identities, right? And so we want to hold that in this space, and we're going to invite you to, once again, bring it into the space, but we're also going to try to hold a space of all those complexities and nuances as we have a conversation.
All right. So, look, Yellow, you gonna take this one, or you want me to? Doesn't matter.
Oh, I think I have you as this. Am I wrong?
Oh, okay. No, I got it. I can do it. So what we're gonna do right now? Sorry, Yellow. So what we're gonna do right now? We want to check in. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Cool. So what we're gonna do right now? We wanna do a pulse check. So what do we mean by this? We want to hear what you're thinking. What are your thoughts? What are you coming in with? What perspective do you have? So we have two questions here. Please feel free to put your responses into the chat box, or you can also raise your hand. There's a little raise hand icon if you want to share. We want to hear your thoughts about the question, about these two questions. So the first question is, when you think of mental health, what comes to mind? And the second question is, how does mental health connect to masculinity? Okay. So we want to hear your thoughts. You can put it in the question box, or you can raise your hand, and we'll unmute you so that you can talk. We want to get your thoughts. We want to hear where you're at and what you're bringing into this space.
We're being shy today, Leroy.
Yeah, you know, maybe it's a Tuesday. I don't know what it is. I don't know. Maybe it's a Tuesday. Please feel free, everyone.
Kind of process. Yeah. I saw some people like raise their hand and put it down. I'm like, okay. It was like, well, maybe not, maybe not.
Before I was thinking, I was like, man, can people hear me? Like, ooh, I hope people can hear me now. Oh, maybe.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Kendall has. Do you want to read it, Leroy? Or you want me to read it?
You can read it.
Okay. So Kendall says,
yeah, because when I read it,
answering the second question.
Okay.
Answering the second question, mental health connects to masculinity in the ways that men are taught to not feel certain emotions, which manifest themselves in harmful ways. All right, Kendall, bringing it in. Dawn says, wellness is a necessary faculty that requires attention and kindness. Oscar says, when I think of mental health, I think broken, stigma. And when related to masculinity, it feels like weakness or something I should not be dealing with. This is very honest and real. Thank you, Oscar. Adam says, I believe that in many ways, Black masculinity socializes us to react or to act outwardly as opposed to retreating inward. You guys are coming here with a theory and everything. So our capacities and willingness to check in with mental health are myopic and underdeveloped. All right. Oscar says, I'm sorry, no, I read that one already, excuse me. Melanie says, Mental health equals the ability to withstand self-reflection, spiritual balance, and resiliency. All right, Melanie. I see everybody came with the A game today. They ready? I want to, if I could respond to these kind of these responses we have. I think it's really, I love how all over the spectrum they are. Like, someone says
right.
Someone now says, Janice says, how stable I'm mentally with what I think or say. What am I with this? Am I acting on my thoughts? And then Kendall says, I think of the bell hooks quote of patriarchy first lesson is the first lesson, severing emotion when thinking about mental health. We have talked about that quote before. And then
did we send her this PowerPoint presentation?
And then Tyrone says, when I was taught to think of mental health, what comes to mind in emotional well-being, and a show emotion is not being well, right? So I love that we lifting these pieces up. I can tell you that, through my experience of asking this question, I've gotten all kinds of reactions. I've had people, particularly in Black communities, I've had people when I ask them, what do you hear when you hear the word mental health? And people say the first thing that comes to mind is when my cousin was taken away by the social worker. Or the first thing that comes to mind, I think of a homeless person. The first thing that comes to mind is I think of being out of control or being taken advantage of, right? And so we're holding which is a lot of what you all brought up in the space, right? That as we move through this conversation we have to hold that mental health in this country has been very deeply connected to the criminal legal system. It's been very deeply connected to a history of transphobia, of racism, homophobia. We're going to talk about that more. And so when we begin to have conversations and we talk mental health, people immediately are bringing in that the responses are like, whoa, because that's what we're triggering, that's what we're activating, right? And so we have to be really critical about how we use that term, or if we use that term. And when we use that term, how do we reframe it in a way that really empowers, gives us agency, as opposed to invoking the historical tradition of mental health, which has really been about, ableism, disempowerment, control in a lot of different ways, right? So I really love that you all lifted that particular piece up and the responses that you shared in terms of how that's seen. It's a really great piece. Leroy, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, I think that is so excellent. Yeah, we'll get into it. I mean, I guess good segue. Good segue. And just thinking about how do we understand mental health. And, Yolo, you touched on it. But we would be remiss. We would be doing a disservice to everybody to not acknowledge how mental health has been used as a way to oppress, and it's been used as a way to criminalize. It's been used as a way to cause harm to our communities. A lot of times, mental health, when we hear the term mental health, again, when we hear that term itself, mental health, a lot of times the first time we hear it is when we're in contact with a social worker, or I am being put in special education, for instance. So I think it's really important for us to, one, acknowledge that, and then two, as we have this conversation, really just think about how we can center mental health, how we can center Blackness, how we can utilize, how we can get into those roots, get into that understanding of mental health, its origins, how it's played out, and how we can take from mental health and how we can center it in ways that is best conducive to us, in the ways that help us be whole, in the ways that help us show up for ourselves and show up for our community. And the best, just real quick example, my dad was in special education until the second grade, and this is a person who has 2 master's degrees, and so, but he was in special ed until the second grade. It wasn't until he snuck into a classroom and took a test that they said, "Oh, wow, you shouldn't be in special education." And thinking about that, me myself, I almost got held back and was almost placed in special education when I was in kindergarten because I couldn't skip or gallop. I didn't know the difference between skipping and galloping. So thinking about education, Black and brown boys, they have a 50% higher chance of getting placed into special education. And knowing how getting placed in special education can completely change the trajectory of the care and the support they receive. So again, just understanding that and understanding how it's real, how mental health and these mental terms have interacted, with us and how they played into our lives. So
yeah,
as we understand, go ahead.
I'd love to add to that piece. I think it's a really brilliant piece you bring in, and we'll talk about a little bit more too. And I love that you hold that there is, just to tease out a little bit more, the reality that often for Black children particularly, that the mental health establishment serves as a means to control and often is used as a tool that misunderstands, does not understand the ways in which Black children show up in the world, or kind of diagnosis, trauma, a variety of other strategies, a variety of other ways in which folks are showing up as being something to being something that it is not. And so I also want to hold that as we hold that piece, that we hold the people who also maybe in special education classes are also capable of getting master's degrees and also doing those getting a variety of different educational accomplishments, right? But it's more about what we want to center is the piece that it's about the ways in which these institutions can sometimes use these diagnostic criteria in ways that are not really supporting the realities of the young people, of young Black people particularly, right? In terms of what their capacities and really needs are. And so really holding that piece, I want to exemplify. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the history of diagnosis, which is something that I do a lot of studying around in terms of how diagnosis is used as a method of control, particularly for Black children and educational institutions. Just want to lift that up and tease that out.
Thank you, Yolo. So understanding mental health and how we understand it, I'd like to get into this definition by mentalhealth.gov. So mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, and how we act. Also helps determine how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and how we make choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood and adolescence through adulthood. I think especially for masculine individuals, people who have been socialized, grew up socialized as men or masculine individuals, a lot of times, going back to the feelings, where we've been taught to ignore that emotional aspect of ourselves, to ignore social well-being, and social well-being meaning how I show up for others, what others ask of me, but then also what I ask of others and how I expect others to show up for me. So these ideas of I can't be emotional, I shouldn't be emotional, or I don't need help, I can do all this on my own. So thinking about that, when we're ignoring that part of who we are, we're very dynamic individuals. We all feel emotions. We all need others. So when we ignore those parts of ourselves, we're ignoring our mental health. And then we'll go into it. We'll talk about it more about how, ignoring those things, how that plays into handling stress, how that plays into relating to others, and how that impacts the way we make choices. And again, this mental health starts from the day that we are born. It starts from it impacts us the day that our parents or the doctor chooses to either put a pink piece of clothing on us or a blue piece of clothing on us. All right, so it starts day one when we begin to be socialized. Growing up, it happens in the playgrounds when we're taught, when someone is taught that, in order to be accepted, we have to cut off emotionally. It happens in adulthood when sometimes, we may put so much into our work and not value, and instead not put work into the relationships and showing up for our individuals or for people that we know and love. A lot of times, again, that's societal pressures that make us or that impact those choices that we make. But that's real, and we just want to hold that and understand that. So we know mental health. Oh, Yola, do you want to say something? No? Okay, cool. So we know mental health. All right, so although current mental health has been framed in terms of Western, white, heteronormative language, basically just think, mental health in the way we understand it, especially in America. Even the term health, like what is health even? Health is determined by, has been determined by what the health of a hetero or a straight white male is. That's what health. That's what health means. What is healthy for a straight white male? So when we look at it, and there we begin. That's been normalized in society. So we may say, oh, mental health, that's a white folks thing, or I ain't got time to do that. Like black folks don't talk about mental health. Like that is the furthest thing from the truth. Okay, us black communities, we've been talking about mental health. We know what mental health is. Mental health is way more than just talk therapy. Mental health is in our music. Mental health is in blues, R&B. Mental health is in movement and dancing. Mental health is in spirituality, the ways we connect with each other. Mental health is everywhere. Okay, we just have been naming it. We name it in ways that are most conducive to us. But because it is not with the set white male, that what I like to call white framing, because it's not in that white framing, it's often not acknowledged. So what we want to do in this space, in our time together, is really understand and utilize the language that we have, utilize our understanding of what we know mental health to be, because we're talking about it, we're doing it right now. Really honor that, recognize that, and apply it and have a conversation about how we can utilize those tools or add tools onto that, and how we can bring those things forward to center our healing and center our experiences with mental health. Just some quick examples. White framing may say anxious. Someone's feeling anxious. But in our words, we may say, oh, I got nerves. My nerves bad. Or I'm feeling, I got my nerves. White framing may say someone's sad, depressed. In our words, we may say, I got the blues. I'm feeling down. I'm feeling down and out. Empathy. Empathy is big, thinking about social well-being. In our words, empathy looks like, I feel you. You come to me, you're talking to me, like, I feel you, dog. I'm here. I'm with you. I'm down for you. Okay? Offended. I'm feeling some type of way. Okay? I'm content. I'm happy. I'm vibing. I'm just riding a wave. I'm chilling. I'm feeling good. Mental illness. Oh, so-and-so was touched. Oh, so-and-so, they a little touched. They a little off. So we've been talking about it. We're just really naming that we have done so, and saying how we can use our own language to support our own mental health.
Can I add something, Leroy, really briefly?
Oh, yeah.
So this is really important too for any clinicians or people who are doing mental health work or any kind of community work, because oftentimes I've had the experience where I'm in spaces with a clinician and somebody's saying that they're experiencing anxiety, or somebody says they're experiencing the nerve, and the clinician comes and says, well, that's not the nerves, that's anxiety. Or you ain't got the blues, you're depressed. And it ends up creating this kind of tug of war around like what actually it is, because maybe the person is like, I'm not anxious, I just got bad nerves. They don't want to use that framing. Mm-hmm. And so as opposed to like, the clinician being, let me honor how you're calling this, but let me ask you more about what you mean when you say you have nerves, or when you have the blues, as opposed to like trying to push onto you a particular language or framing that may be foreign to you or may not be comfortable for you at this point in your journey. So it's really important when we hear this kind of terminology come up in our own work or within ourselves, asking the question, what do you mean? Tell me more what you mean when you say that you got the blues. When you say that you feel that so-and-so is touched, what does that mean? And it's also about holding, like as Leroy said, the reality that there's few lies more racist. I feel like I struggle with in mental health, than the lie that Black people or Latino people or anybody that can talk about mental health. That deeply is racist, right? It's based on the idea that somehow we're so inferior that we don't name this particular experience of our world, right? So if you don't do anything else after this session, please, the next time someone says Black people don't talk about mental health, say, actually, that's not accurate. We have our own way of speaking of mental health. It's just not in this dominant framing. I think that's really important to name, particularly people who do community work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yellow. Thank you. It's crucial. So reframing mental health, thinking about mental health, like physical health All people have mental health. Okay, like I said, we are dynamic individuals. We feel emotions and we interact with folks. Okay, so to say that, um, I don't have mental health, that's saying that you're not a person. Okay, it is. It is. We all have, just like physical health, we all have mental health. Mental health does not mean mental illness. We think about it. We may ask somebody, oh, how often do you work out? What's your diet like? Or what we're referring to is their physical. What we're referring to is their physical health. Does that automatically mean that they have a physical ailment, that they have a physical illness? No, not at all. And thinking about it, why is it that if we ask you, what is it that you're feeling in this moment? What are some healthy coping strategies that you do? What is your support system? Thinking about that, that doesn't mean that I have a mental illness, that I'm experiencing a mental illness. I'm just checking in with my mental health. And again, thinking about it, a lot of times, our first experiences, especially Black folks, with that term itself, mental health, a lot of times, like for me, it was when, I was being placed into or wanted to be held back, or with folks who are in situations with social workers. So a lot of times there's trauma. There's a traumatic experience that's being tied to that, to our first word of mental health. And so mental health can become, that term can activate feelings of trauma, feelings of sadness, feelings of fear. So again, normalizing that mental health does not mean mental illness. Mental health is a spectrum that fluctuates and is not always fixed. What we talked about earlier with the feelings wheel, we're dynamic people. So automatically we put things in binaries. We say, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. But that's not the reality. That's why we do the feelings wheel. We're checking where we're at in the spectrum. Because I can be in multiple states at multiple different times throughout the day. In this workshop, in this training today, you're going to be feeling a lot of different things. You're going to be on that emotional spectrum, and that's okay. All right, that is definitely okay. So I'm not saying something is right or wrong, like I have mental health, now I have bad mental health. That's really not helpful framing. Just saying, where am I at? Where's my mental health at today? And what is it that I need today, right now, in this moment? And again, thinking of mental health as a part of healing justice in our lives. Yellow's going to talk more about healing justice, what that is, but seeing how us doing us practicing mental health, us understanding mental health in our lives, how that is disrupting cycles of harm, how that is disrupting cycles of trauma. One thing that's really helpful for me in talking about mental health is looking at the word itself. So the Latin root of mental is mens, which means mind. The English root of health is health, which means wholeness. So mental health, you can say, means mind wholeness. This for me, when I think of mental health as mind wholeness, is extremely empowering. Because thinking about our being core assumptions, that means that I do have value. My value is in me actualizing my wholeness and seeing my true self. And we think of terms of mental health as wholeness. It's not, I'm not my mental illness. I'm not my diagnosis. It's, I'm a person on a journey to be whole, to practice mind wholeness. I think that's very empowering. That sees my value and it focuses on the actions and behaviors that I should be doing to practice wholeness and to be whole in my mind and other aspects. So just holding that, the idea that mental health is mind wholeness. So bell hooks on integrity. So I was putting this slide deck together, and Yola was like, "Oh, you got bell hooks in here?" I'm like, "Yes, I love me some bell hooks. It's gonna be in every BMR." So it is what it is. But I think bell hooks just so magnificently speaks upon that idea of wholeness and that idea of healing when she speaks about integrity. For bell hooks, integrity means being whole, unbroken, undivided. It describes a person who has unified the parts of his or her personality so that there is no longer a split in the soul. Thinking about as masculine folks, when we are forced to disconnect to our emotional selves, when we're taught that we can't express feelings, we can't express emotions, we're disconnecting. We're disconnecting. We're divided. And so when thinking about healing, meaning wholeness, to live with integrity, which, I mean, I feel like everybody wants to live with integrity. Few people, I'd say, want to live in a lie. So living with integrity means to be whole. So to be whole means to heal. And to live with integrity, in order to live ourselves, be authentic, we must heal, which means we need to do this work around mental health. Just holding that and thinking about that when we continue our discussion about the things we're going to talk about going forward.
Yes, I want to add on to this piece before you move on. One of the framings I think is really helpful around this concept of wholeness is that we are always whole beings. It is trauma, it is racism, it is homophobia, it is sexism that leads us to believe that we are fractured or not whole beings. It is the perception that is often, these systems make us perceive ourselves unwhole. These diagnoses or these things that tell us that we are not whole, but we are always in a state of wholeness. And it's just about, do we perceive that wholeness? Are we in connection with that wholeness, the roundness of who we are, right? So even the idea of integrity, like saying, I'm always in a state of wholeness, but what is my perception? What is my relationship or consciousness relationship to the fact that I am still whole? Another piece I want to hold too is that it's really important for folks who are living with a mental condition, who've been diagnosed with a mental condition, is that when we say that mental health, and one of the ways we use to reframe it is saying that just because I'm living with a mental condition doesn't mean I don't have good mental health, right? You could be living with bipolar or living with depression or living with an anxiety disorder, and you, like all other folks on the planet, you have days where there are challenging days, where maybe your mental health is not necessarily optimal, and days where you're feeling really centered and really present, right? The diagnosis itself does not necessarily connect to the state of your mental health. It's about your relationship to the diagnosis, right? What is my relationship to my bipolar, my depression, my anxiety disorder? How am I taking care of myself and managing myself? And then I can be in a state of connection or centeredness that someone who may not have a formal mental health condition still may be not in a condition, not in a relationship where they're in good space with their mind or connected to their mind, body, wellness, etc. So just holding that piece, and also understanding the arbitrary nature of these terms, right? I try to use centered as opposed to good, or optimal as opposed to like bad or good, right? Understanding that feels so different for all of us, right? And so holding that, and I'll talk more about that later, but like just really holding that piece is really critical.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yellow. Thank you. So as we go into go ahead. You got it. You can do it, Yellow.
Yeah. So for the next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about healing. So this is a word that I have a lot of feelings around. We're going to talk a little bit, but I want to hear from you all. I want to hear from some folks talking. I'm tired of hearing just me and Leroy chat. Me and Shannon and MJ, we doing all the work. I want to hear from y'all. Okay. So when somebody says the word healing, what does that mean to you, and what comes up to mind? I want to invite folks to raise their hand if you would like to be unmuted. And I want you to talk to me a little bit about what does that mean, how have you seen that word be used, etc. in this space. All right. I see first hand. Who's this up here? Okay, I see Christian. So Christian, I'm going to unmute you. Can you tell me what does healing mean to you?
Christian, he, him, his. Thank you. Healing, when I hear that word, I think about how I never heard that word until, or really felt like I could access healing until I started to be in community with Black folks who are also doing that work. So very distant and very impossible for me. And when I think about healing, I think about being whole. I think about moving through trauma and moving closer to my fullest self.
I love that. Being whole, moving through trauma, being closer to my authentic self. And I love that you said community, right? I love that you said that healing was a part of community. That's such a Those are such like beautiful ways to frame that piece. And then like you came into understanding what healing was when you were in community, right? That's really powerful as well. Thank you for sharing that piece.
Thank you.
Christian. All right, I have one more person. Adam has his hand. Adam, had your hand up. Ginger. Oh, let's see. Adam, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. So I think that because of so much conversation around mental health these days, which is a positive thing, I think in ways it's kind of been commodified and kind of been it's kind of been a mark of like some kind of attainment or like some kind of separatist kind of I'm in therapy, yep. I'm healing. What are you doing? Are you making yourself ready for your partner? So I think, and while it's been kind of more mainstream these days, it's also it's brought with it a kind of value-added system and kind of cheapened and sensationalized in ways that have taken away its true meaning, and I think.
Yeah. Adam, bringing it in. I'm so glad you brought this particular piece in. So I think that you raised some really important points, right? One of the moments we're in currently is we see healing as a term being weaponized, right? It's like, you need to heal, which is translation for something is wrong with you, which is a reinforcement of ableism and racism, this idea that like, that there's something inadequate about us, right? That we need to heal, right? As opposed to thinking about healing, and we're going to talk a little bit more of this, as an ongoing journey that we're always engaging in, right? They're like, you know, I hear folks every day say like, well, I'm all healed with my wounds, and I'm just like, I don't know what planet you came from where you don't healed all your wounds, but that sounds questionable to me, you know, as opposed to, and like it's being used as a way to kind of enforce hierarchy, enforce elitism, like I'm doing healing work, I'm doing therapy, so like, you know, I'm doing my work and I've got it all together. When there's a lot of nuances in those pieces, right? One, understanding that just because, just like when you go to the barber, your barber might have a license, that don't mean to know how to cut your hair. Every therapist don't mean to have a license, don't mean to know how to take care of your emotional health, right? And just because you're actually engaging in that process, there are a lot of us are just sitting up in therapy, but what deep work are we doing, and why? And if we're doing deep work, in my opinion, then we're not trying to compare ourselves to anyone else versus where they are, their journey, and what tools they have access to, right? So I think you bring in a really powerful piece about like the commodification of it, the ways in which it intersects with capitalism and becomes a word that's now used against our communities to say that like there's something wrong with us, as opposed to systems have created these challenges. These are consequences of systems and systems harm, and that it's also just an ongoing process, right? So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Adam, but Adam, you there? Oh, okay. I think you lost you. Okay, I'm gonna go back to me, Adam. All right. So really, it's important pieces to bring in. Like we talk about what does healing mean? What does it mean to us? And thinking about those critical intersections. Can we go to the next slide, Leroy? So these are just some definitions that I want to present to folks to kind of think about, right? So there's one that I often use, and I say that healing is about developing a different relationship to a wound that will not hinder you in the present moment. So, for example, the scars I might have on my legs, on my back, I'm always going to have those scars, right? Those scars are not going to go away. Over time, they might become lighter, like in my skin. They might, like the impression might smooth over, but the scars are still there. The wound is still there. What changes is my relationship to them as they begin to like fade away, right? And when I say think about fade away in a psychological context, think about it like I was hurt by someone. And as I deal with that wound, as I move through that wound over time, potentially that wound becomes less charged. I feel less activated when I can talk about it without feeling overwhelmed emotionally as I process it, as I move through it. So it's not time to heal the wound, but my ability to engage and process and move through the wound somatically, psychically, and spiritually, right? And so over time, what happens is the wound is still there, but my relationship to it has changed. I'll give a simple example of everybody's had a partner they may have lost, like maybe they broke up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner. Initially, there's all this really, maybe like this really harsh kind of like feeling, and you're feeling really low. And then over time, as you begin to process the experience and all the pieces around it, maybe you get to a point where you're like, it doesn't hurt as much to talk about the fact that I'm not with that person anymore. I have a different understanding of that. That's not because of time, but that's really because of processing, right? Decharging the wound, right? So my relationship to the wound has shifted, even as the wound is still present. It's still there, right? But I have a relationship with it where it doesn't hurt, it doesn't harm me as much, or doesn't impact me as much in the present moment. It's important to say that healing as a construct or as a framework is not linear, it's not fixed, and it's not absolute. Like, I might be working through something that hurt me 10 years ago, and I might be working through it 20 years from now. You know, it's going to show up in different ways. So it's not about like, you need to heal now and get over it. That's not the way that we as human beings work. What happens is we work with the things that come up, and new things are activated, and the onion is peeled back, and we're like, oh, I didn't realize I was feeling that way. I didn't realize I learned that from my mom and my dad, and I'm still carrying that. I didn't realize that last relationship was still holding me or impacting me in this particular way. And then we begin to work with it as we move through that process. But ideally, it cultivates tenderness within us, and also the understanding that we are never, we're never done, you know. We might meet someone else who's in a different part of their healing journey, which is really important, right? So I want to make sure I make the distinction. You might meet a partner or friend of someone else who might be in a different stage of their journey. But where they are in their journey is not about you, it's about where they are in their journey, right? So maybe they're like, I'm not in a place where they're able to hold something for you or hold emotions with you, or maybe they're not in a place where they're able to navigate their distress and trauma in a way that shows up in dignity and respect for you. That's where they are in their journey, right? So it's not about trying to judge them and say you need to heal, but honoring this is where you are. How do I build a relationship with you based off where you are? What does that look like for us? And in terms of what we can build together, if that means a friendship, if that means, a distant relationship, whatever that is. So honoring wherever we are in our healing journey, and that we're all in different places, and we can build, but we have to really respect it from a place that's not rooted in this hierarchy, right? Dr. Dion Bates talks about healing occurs when we begin to change the meaning that we attach to our woundedness, thereby accepting yet changing our relationship with our woundedness, right? So the meaning I attach to this, like when I think about meaning with woundedness, it's the difference between the shame and guilt piece, right? I am bad versus I did a behavior that was harmful. You know what I mean? Or someone did something to me versus I made them do this to me, right? We're changing the narrative of the story that we're telling ourselves into one that shifts our relationship to the particular wound, right? I think it's important, and one thing Dr. Bates says as well, she talks about healing as a birthright. It's a wholeness, and it literally means wholeness, right? And so once again, driving back to when we're talking about healing and wholeness and mental health, how do we reframe these conversations in our communities to really center on these concepts as opposed to the judgment, the shaming that is often very central to mental health, very central to when we talk about healing, and it's deeply rooted in racism and misogyny, right? And so really lifting up those pieces in terms of how we think about healing and how we're having conversations. You want to slap them? So briefly, I'm going to talk about healing justice. Healing justice is a theoretical framework that comes out of the work of mostly Black, Southern, queer, trans women, disabled folks. And it really is centered on this idea that in order for us, beyond mental health, right? Because when we talk about mental health is a construct that comes out of the Western world, out of the white world, right? Used to call mental hygiene. There's a whole broad history. And it often very focused on what this kind of idea that the cognitive is something distinctive from my mind, spirit, and body, right? And so the parts of beliefs all across the world teach us that the mind, body, spirit split is actually fictitious, that actually this is all. My mind is all through my body. My mind is in my legs and in my feet. It's not just here. This is just one place where it kind of occupies, right? And so we think about it from that framework. Healing justice really encourages us to begin to understand that in order for us to really heal in our communities, engaging in that ongoing journey, we have to really center traditions and practices of ancestral, cultural, environmental, spiritual, physical, emotional context, and we have to center healing in relationship to all those things, right? So that means it's not just about what talk therapy, what's in my head, it's about what's in my body. It's about what's in my spirit, what's in my ancestral lineage, what's in the land, what's in the food that I'm consuming, that all these pieces are deeply connected to how I'm able to heal. But also when we talk about healing justice, marrying those two terms, we're trying to confront these historical inequities and transform them into spaces that help center collective safety and healing as a critical part of our political liberation, right? So that's a very big term, right? But it is in simple terms, I always tell people the healing justice says that we cannot heal if we don't dismantle systems of oppression concurrently, right? That like, as opposed to this Western model that says that I go to therapy as a single individual to get healing. Healing justice says no, the community, the family, the systems, the ancestral lineage, all these particular aspects of the community must be healed, and must be engaging in an ongoing healing process that is unraveling the ways these systems of oppression have poisoned our perspectives and our ability to be in dignity and humanity with each other. All right. So that is one piece there. All right. So when we talk about the legacy of mental health as a construct, I think it's whenever you're talking with anybody, whether yourself or with Black folks in communities, I'm gonna tell you the one thing we learned: we cannot have a conversation about mental health without talking about the ways that it harms Black and Brown communities. When we open it up to like create some space to name that, that creates and builds the trust. And let's go deeper into a dialogue. So if you're talking about, oh, I'm working with all these Black men in my community, and they want to talk about masculinity, they want to talk about mental health. Start like when they bring up the pieces about like the history about Tuskegee or the fear and anxiety, as opposed to silencing it, creating space for it to open up and hear and validate those fears. Because the mental health stigma in our communities is based on legitimate harm and pain that continues to this day, right? And so on this particular slide, we have a couple of things listed, right? The unequal treatment, right? So we know historically, looking at certain diagnoses like schizophrenia, we can see how historically criminal legal system has paired up with the mental health system to actually target Black bodies with unequal diagnoses based on, to use that as a way to kind of incarcerate either political prisoners or activists, right? And so we see that like this fear that Black folks have about mental health doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not just about Tuskegee or about years, it's about continued harm that's happening. In Patrice Conclour's book, who's one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, she talks about her brother who was living with schizophrenia and the ways in which the system was designed to incarcerate him and not support him in his mental health and his diagnosis, but actually criminalize him for his distress, right? And so we see that like we have to begin with this piece when we talk about this by honoring and naming it that like, hey, a lot of harm is still happening, has happened, and that's why the fear and the mistrust exists, right? And so holding that piece, we also have to hold that like the deeply embedded racism, the history of homophobia and transphobia as the DSM has been used. We talk about the Diagnosis Fiscal Manual. It is the Bible of psychiatry and mental health. And it's a tool that has often been used to justify all kinds of harm against different communities, right? And so we have to hold that when we talk about mental health. We have to hold the fear of being taken away against our rights, which is still something that people living with mental illness and Black and Brown people struggle with. It's a very real reality that is connected to our fear around mental health and talking to therapists. Recently, the American Psychological Association had to release a statement to ICE saying that like they did not condone the use of confidential therapy notes by clinicians to use that information to detain folks who are immigrants, right? So we're seeing how these institutions are being used against us to this day. So it's important that we hold that like our anxiety and our fear around mental health is adaptive, is real, is legitimate, and that we give folks tools and strategies to navigate those systems and advocate for them when those systems harm them, because unfortunately we live in a current moment where sometimes the mental health systems cannot be in our best interest and can be harmful, right? So we have to hold that nuance with also holding that like there's a lot in the dominant mental health system that can be useful and helpful for our healing and our wellness, even as it sometimes is subverted by these toxic systems. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the more common mental health diagnoses and how we see them showing up, right, in our communities and in masculine communities and male communities. One of the most common mental health, quote unquote, challenges in our communities, is anxiety, right? It's the most common mental health issue in the country. About 18% or 40 million adults live with anxiety, right? And so that includes panic disorder, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, but it also includes people who don't have a formal anxiety disorder, right? When we talk about mental health as a spectrum, just because you don't have a formalized anxiety disorder doesn't mean that you still don't operate. You may not have distress as it relates to anxiety, right? So the formal diagnosis is also connected to why you even have access to treatment. Doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't still suffering in some capacity, right? So what are some things that are connected to anxiety, right? Apprehension, tension, restlessness, irritability, anticipating the worst. Anxiety shows up in our physical bodies, racing heart, shortness of breath, upset stomach, sweating, headaches. When I think about anxiety in masculine communities, I think about the ways in which Black men and masculine folks have been encouraged to say, I have to perform a particular kind of gender all the time. And if I'm not performing that, I am in risk of my value or my worth as a human being being denigrated, right? So there's anxiety to provide, I think about, right? So we talk about, like, historically, how many Black men or masculine folks may have felt like, if I can't provide for my family, I am less of a man, less of a masculine person. And therefore, as opposed to facing that anxiety and that fear, I'm going to disappear. I'm going to leave because that fear, that hurt is so overwhelming, that anxiety is so overwhelming that I would rather run away from that than face it. When we think about anxiety, think about our relationships with, like, institutions like the police, right? When you see the blue headlights pop up in your rear view mirror, right? That is also some ways in which anxiety is adaptive. Like, anxiety is kind of letting us know sometimes something is wrong. When anxiety becomes a disorder, and when it becomes disruptive in our lives, in our social, emotional, our family lives, in ways that are, like, not useful or hurtful, right? Like patterns of disruption, right? But there's a way in which we all experience anxiety. And so it's not something that is just, like, off with those folks. It's something that exists within certain degrees in all of us. And so thinking about that piece too now, there's examples in your own life. Like, how does anxiety show up? Like, does it show up in your body where your pits sweat? Does it show up in which you are constantly having headaches? For a lot of Black folks, we have higher degrees of somaticization, which means that a lot of our distress shows up in our body. And like, so for example, you might talk to a lot of Black elders and you'll say, can you tell me why does your shoulder hurt all the time? And, like, the doctor says there's nothing wrong with your shoulder, but the shoulder pain being connected to an experience they may have had. Maybe they were assaulted by the police. Maybe they were, like, maybe that there was a particular event that happened that triggered a somatic reaction, and now the body is still holding that anxiety, right? And so acknowledging this piece is really important because a lot of our Black and masculine folks are struggling with anxiety in this moment of COVID-19 about supporting, being able to support families, to kind of live out this traditional masculine ideal. And anxiety can lead us sometimes to act irrationally or act in ways that create harm. So cultivating an awareness of, do I feel anxious? What is this nerve, this jumping in my body? How does it show up? Is an ongoing process that's really critical to our wellness and to us cultivating a relationship to our mental health. Next slide, please. Then we're going to talk about anxiety and depression as two central ways, right? And so when we talk about depression, most folks are familiar with what depression is, right? And so one of the most common mental health conditions, right? About 17 million people report one major depressive episode in the past year. And these statistics from NAMI, of course, may not always take into consideration the nuances of Black and Brown communities, so they might be much higher, right? And it's important to know that even though we might use common language of, I feel depressed, depression is more than just a feeling of sad or going through a rough patch. It's a serious mental health condition, right? We're talking about on a neurological or on an emotional, psychic level, a deep impact that in response to often trauma or a variety of different events in one's life, right? And so symptoms of depression show up in sadness, emptiness, hopelessness, irritability, and guilt, right? But it also shows up in our communities in other ways that aren't necessarily these traits. Sometimes it shows up in anger and rage. I think that's a very important piece for us to talk about when we're talking about our own work with ourselves, but also in our community. A lot of Black men who might be really angry, like, why is he so angry and so irritable? Well, a lot of times it's because they're depressed, right? The depression is showing up in that particular route, that particular mechanism, right? And so if we thought about it from that lens, when someone shows up in that way, as I'm seeing that as the depression, how do I respond differently to that? Or how would that inform the way in which I might engage someone embodying that particular trait, right? So this is just like high level, right? But thinking about depression, and when we talk about masculine folks and mental health, we hold also that for many of us, when we are taught to emotionally disconnect from ourselves, that often leads to depression, right? Because we're disconnected from what's going on with us, what we're feeling, right? And so a part of what we'll talk about later is the connection between toxic masculinity and how it contributes to increased poor health outcomes for Black men and masculine individuals, in conjunction with the already systemic oppression that we don't have the tools to process because we don't have the emotional literacy to help us navigate it, right? So really holding those pieces is really critical. Next slide, please. I know I need to move on a little faster. I'm going to make sure being mindful of our time. So there's some causes, right? What are some causes of anxiety and depression? Racism, transphobia, ableism, homophobia, systems of oppression create mental health distress. Trauma, when you experience trauma at an early age, there's also some evidence that talks about genetics. There's certain mood disorders such as depression or bipolar. That, like, if you have a parent or a caregiver who is living with that condition, you may also exhibit qualities or traits of that condition or that condition itself. Life circumstances, living under oppression, right? Like, you know what I mean? Financial standing, like all these things can produce ongoing stress and worry. And so also then we talk about brain changes, like, right, images showing that the frontal lobe of the brain becomes less active when a person is depressed. So we're talking about neurological pieces as well, right? All holding that. So when we talk about addressing mental health and healing, we can't just talk about it on individual level. We have to talk about how our society is exaggerating and amplifying our mental health distress by unequal pay, by ICE, by these systems of oppression, by unequal education. It is actually fostering mental health unwellness. And so our solutions to addressing our mental health cannot be just clinical. They have to also be engaged in food justice, in addressing police brutality, addressing disability justice, addressing misogyny and sexism that gives a disproportionate rate of sexual assault that happens to women and girls, right? So we have to really think about mental health as all of these active interventions, not just about the clinical. The clinical is one piece. We currently have an initiative right now with being called about food justice and healing justice. There's a large body of literature that talks about how for a lot of young folks who may not be able to eat good food or eat well, the symptoms that you might display over a period of not being able to eat well will look very similar to some qualities and characteristics of ADHD or depressive symptoms, right? And so, so really holding that our mental health interventions are not just clinical; they are much more, have to be much more diverse and much more multi-pronged. If that makes sense. And next slide, please. All right. So I want to pause because I feel like I just did a lot. We just went through a lot. I just want to pause and let that sit for a moment because I think we just talked about a lot of things. And while we just did a high-level overview of depression and anxiety, we could spend we have whole workshops on those topics. I want you to really sit and think about how they show up in Black men and masculine folks, and masculine women, trans men, and cisgender men, and Black gay men. How do we manage our anxiety? How are we managing our depression? You know? And so this here is some examples of some coping strategies, right? Because it's all about how are we coping? What are coping strategies are available to us? And what tools do we have to cope? So for example, I'm a big believer we need as many coping strategies as we can get, diverse coping strategies, right? Our relationship to our coping strategies can either make them not useful to our wellness, or they can help us cultivate further wellness. It's really about our relationship to them. These are some examples. So one of the coping strategies might be emotional awareness, which is what we did today. We'll practice today, right? We practice getting in touch with what we're feeling, in touch with our bodies, in touch with what's going on in our bodies. One of the things that happens for a lot of folks who are enacting harm or violence, particularly in domestic violence scenarios, is a disconnection often from the physical self, a disconnection, like it's immediately going into reactivity, right? So cultivating a kind of body awareness is also in of itself a kind of intervention around violence prevention, but also an intervention around how to heal and navigate and hold our trauma, right? What's going on in my body as disembodied Black and brown folks? How do I spending time with my body to be able to feel like what am I feeling? What's happening here? What happens to my body when I get angry? What happens to my body when I'm sad? What is the messaging? What can I do to kind of alleviate that? Emotional awareness is one strategy, right? Other strategies people might use is like mindfulness, things like Tai Chi, taking a walk, prayer, or yoga. Those are other strategies that a lot of folks may use, right, to cope and to navigate the anxiety and the stress of the moment. A lot of us are redirecting. Redirecting are things that help me get a new focus. If you have little people in your life, you might be like, let's do some art, let's do some drawing, let's cook a new meal. It's redirecting the energy, right? Because people are, once again, in this particular moment where a lot of us are not able to get access to therapy or broader intensive care, we're finding different ways to cope. And so like some of this, getting a sense of like how are we coping and helping cultivate diverse coping strategies can be really helpful for folks that are under resourced and don't have access to like these traditional modalities of therapy and healing. I'll briefly talk about nurturing and soothing. The difference between nurturing and soothing, we say at Beam, nurturing is activities that nourish your body. Soothing are activities that kind of give you this peace where they like temporarily relieve you discomfort. But soothing are often things that sometimes can perpetuate guilt or can be excessive after we do them, right? So a nurturing thing for me might be that maybe I go to my garden and I plant, right? And after I do that, I feel really full and I feel very supported and connected. A soothing thing might be after I had this really terrible experience, maybe I go eat a gallon of ice cream, right? Now, there's nothing that we're not trying to say there's something wrong with eating the gallon of ice cream, but we're saying what happens to you what do you feel after the gallon of ice cream? Do you feel shame and guilt? And so then it becomes this thing where it's like it creates this. It doesn't nourish you. It actually creates a feeling of sadness, of frustration in you, right? Now, you might also sometimes eat a gallon of milk, gallon of ice cream, and you don't feel shame or guilt, and that's a different conversation, right? Like, you know what I mean? But acknowledging like what does it create for you in that context, right? And is it a compulsive or excessive relationship to that particular strategy? Or what is your relationship to that coping strategy, and how much are you using it, and how are you using it? How is it impacting you and the people around you is a really critical key in terms of how we think about managing our stress. Because what we're doing right now in this COVID-19 moment, we're not going to get rid of our anxiety and our depression and our stress. We're going to have to find ways to cope and navigate it, right? And many of us are already doing these things here, but it's about sometimes getting really intentional. What intentionally can I do every day to help me manage my anxiety? Do I start my morning with my feelings wheel? Do I start my morning meditating? Do I go for a walk? What do I need to manage and cope the stress of living in a transphobic and racist and homophobic society that is also experiencing a pandemic, right? And what does that look like? And we know that from the literature, what we see, like for many of us as masculine folks and Black men, when we don't manage our distress well, when we don't cope well, often that harm, that distress shows up as violence that is enacted on feminine, Black women, trans and queer folks, right? And so a part of the intervention is to cultivate some awareness for folks so that we can begin to do our work and show up differently even in our distress. Because oftentimes what ends up happening is the distress is enacted on the most vulnerable who are available, who are present. And those people are often women, queer folks, trans folks, etc. So just naming those pieces. This is a handout as well that we have in the handouts for folks to kind of have a conversation with your family and your friends. How are you coping? What are your coping strategies? What are you doing? How can I support you in collective coping? What does it look like? Next slide. We talked about this piece already. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, looking at our time, but it's just like some ways the depression can show up uniquely in Black community. So oversleeping a lot, not expressing or communicating feelings, commitment to control of environment or others. You know, sometimes the commitment to control is I was hurt once and I feel really sensitive around this, so I'm going to control everyone so I can never get hurt again. I'm going to control this environment, and I'm going to inflict that through like power, patriarchal privilege. One of the ways in which depression can often show up, right? So just lifting this up, I think we talked about it already, but I want to make sure I just bring it up for a moment. Go ahead, Leroy.
So in second time, YOLO, I'm just gonna go over this question. And we'll just get into traditional masculinity and mental health. So really quick, I'm just gonna talk about how traditional masculinity, how that intersects, like that connection between traditional masculinity and mental health, how folks, masculine folks, how boys, how they are brought up, and how that leads to the relationship that a lot of masculine folks have with mental health. So forced gendered upbringing. So children are born and seen as boys, immediately taught by communities to emotionally repress or deny their feelings. So just think about it. Kids are 2-3 years old, little boys who are perceived based on their biological sex as being boys. They're taught, they're forced. No, you can't. Don't show emotions. No, you can't play with dolls. Play with toys, or play with cars, play with action figures. So already being gendered, not having the choice, to choose which toys to play with, not having the choice to choose how to act, how to show up. Two, taught to disconnect. So as young folks grow up, being taught that, that emotions, being taught that to disconnect from your emotions, that leads to struggles with expressing feelings, and that contributes to depression, it contributes to anxiety, it contributes to isolation and violence for young Black masculine folks, men and adults. So a lot of times the only way to express oneself is through enacting violence or by being angry. That's the only acceptable emotion. And then to enact violence, namely upon others, is tolerated and it's accepted. So three, going into that, when we've been socialized to and been taught that anger and violence, those are the only ways in which to express oneself, and we haven't been taught to check in with our emotional self. We haven't been taught emotional literacy. Haven't been taught some of the different coping strategies that we just finished discussing and exploring, like mindfulness, leads us to enact stress and distress and enact those emotions that we're feeling onto other people. A lot of times more vulnerable folks, for instance, Black women, queer and trans folks themselves, that causes harm. And then number four, so exploitation by systems of oppression. So the criminal justice system, inaccessibility of healthcare and mental health resources, it preys on that. It exploits. It exploits when Black folks enact violence, when they choose violence, because Black folks are 5 times more likely to be arrested than other demographics, than other races. In particular Black men. So that inability to do coping strategies, that not being emotionally aware, not being able to use different outlets, that falls right into the exploitation of the systems of oppression. And then along with that, excess emotional labor is placed on women and caretakers, and that creates own mental health challenges. Unnecessary expectations are placed on women and caretakers, and that leads to more emotional challenges that they have to experience on their own. And then that trauma, those emotional pressures, that depression, it leads to the cycle of harm. So children, again, they experience that, families experience that, communities experience that, and the system, the cycle repeats itself. So just really quick, some mental health statistics to see how this plays out in action. So parents are more likely to attribute aggressive attitudes to newborn males and females. For number 2, national study, 85% of LGBTQIA students have experienced harassment because of their gender or sexual orientation. 85%. So this violence, it's being normed, it's normalized. 3, men accepting traditional masculinity will have more negative ideas about seeking mental health services than those with more flexible gender attitudes. And Black men are 4 times more likely to die in suicide by Black women. 4, African Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of whites, and only 69% of adult whites with major depressive episodes receive treatment. Only 53% of adult African Americans did. And in 2018, 67% of Black minors lived in single parent households. Of those single households, 57% of those were single mother households. So again, talking about that extra pressure, extra responsibilities placed on feminine folks. And then lastly, ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences. So if you're a child and you experience certain traumas, you're more likely to have a whole range of detrimental bad mental health or harmful mental health, or not mental health, but harmful experiences with health. So if you have a family member who is experiencing depression, who has been incarcerated, if you've seen domestic abuse, violence, separation, or divorce, that increases your risk of having depression by 490%. And you're 12 times more likely to commit suicide. So again, thinking about those cycles of harm and how they continue. So what do you think, Yellow? Okay, go ahead.
So I think we're at 5:45. I want to just take one piece, and I think we're gonna go directly into the exercise of the reimagining exercise. But so I want to hold it like one of the things we talk about. So when we talk about you see how this concept of masculinity, toxic masculinity. Actually, keep going to the previous slide, Leroy. Previous slide. Go there. Sure. This is why it's important. We use these graphics, and this is also downloadable graphics, to talk about how we have to interrupt this as well as even as we're interrupting other systems of oppression, right? That this is a critical intervention for the wellness of Black folks, Black masculine folks, and Black men, right? And how this is deeply wedded to reframing mental health and to a discourse that we're able to be engaged in and expand and amplify. Just want to just kind of say that piece to wrap that piece up. Go ahead.
All right.
So what I want to do now is we talked about this piece. Actually, go to the next slide, the previous slide before this, Leroy, because I want everybody to start reading that yet. Yes. So we faced all the funkiness. Many of you have heard those pieces before. Maybe there were new pieces that we've been holding. We want to move us into the space of thinking what's possible when we reimagine. Like, what if we know the ins and outs of how these toxic things show up in our communities? What do we need to do to reimagine, and how could it feel in our bodies? How could it feel in our homes? How could it feel in our communities? For us to take this framework of masculinity and reimagine it reimagine it and envision something different for ourselves, right? What does it feel? What does it sound and look like, right? Just taking a moment to kind of feel that in our bodies. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So on this document, which you have in your handout, this is just this is something that Leroy and I actually did as a reimagining practice, right? So we don't have time to go through all of it, but I'm going to take it and kind of go through it briefly, right? So it's really about what could be possible for our communities and our world if we know this is the problem. What needs to be created? And so this is really Leroy's genius, giving it to Leroy, his genius in creating this tool, and me supporting him in creating this tool. Really thinking like, how can we shift it? So one first piece we have here, as opposed to that place where people who are socialized, raised as boys, are taught to emotionally disconnect, and many Black women and girls are taught the same thing as well. Let's don't get it twisted. But instead of that, we start with a gender-neutral care. That all babies are shown empathy, compassion, and care. People are not encouraged to make assumptions on how they should be based on their sex assigned at birth. So that means no blue, no pink. We don't assume this is your trajectory. You are a child, and we're going to actually nurture you and care for you as a child, not based off of gendered assumptions. So that means that, for example, a lot of times I see in our communities, a young Black girl who's a toddler may fall. We want to coddle her and support her, but when a young Black boy falls, we say he needs to learn how to be a man, let him cry, right? That kind of conditioning, the conditioning that we give to young Black girls that tells them to disempower or disengage from your voice, be smaller to make me feel safe, or more comfortable, not even safe, more comfortable, be smaller. What if we didn't communicate that to young Black girls? We allowed Black girls to be the full expression of who they were? What would be possible? So starting with this idea of gender-neutral care, how do we create that in our communities? What needs to happen to shift so that our children, regardless of who they are born or bodies they are born into, are allowed to have their full expression? Do you want the next one, Leroy?
Yeah, so emotional literacy focused upbringing. So what would it look like if boys and children of all genders, regardless of their biological sex or how we assume them to be, what would it look like if we taught them how to tap into their emotions, how to express their feelings? And we didn't say the only emotions that it's okay, or the only emotions we allowed for boys to express is anger. What would that look like? What does it look like for our young boys to communicate their needs, to know how to ask for what it is instead of taking and enacting violence to get what it is that they need? What would it look like for them to have the space to be safe enough, to feel valued enough, that their needs, that they could communicate their needs, one, and then that their needs would be met with honor, respect, dignity, and be valued? Yellow, the next one.
Yeah. So next we have healing-centered coping strategies, and this is just once again us imagining, right? So we have one of these we're going to give to you because we want you to imagine too. But healing-centered coping strategies. So what if we lived in a world? How do we create a world where self-worth is not defined by jobs, objectification, or power over other people, and where people of different mental health conditions are embraced and supported? Where we're introduced to strategies to help us cope very early on that are supportive, right? Whether that is yoga or basketball, which a lot are, whether that's poetry and journaling or ballet, whatever. What if we cultivated and encouraged more active coping strategies, particularly through the arts, not just like even traditional mental health, for our folks? What would that look like? How could that feel? And not gendering them as well, you know? What's the next one, Leroy?
Yeah, so accountable communities. So having communities that are accountable, that help create spaces where emotional health practices are continued, where mental health stigma is widely considered unacceptable. You know, talking about where in every space a Black person in the community goes to, when we're having those conversations, when we're checking in about how are you feeling, you know, when we're talking about some of the different coping strategies that each one of us is doing. And we really nourish those relationships. And from having those conversations, normalizing emotional awareness and practicing, different coping strategies, healing-centered coping strategies. You know, what would a community that's normalized like that, what would that look like? You know, what if a barbershop had, as you come into the barbershop, like what if there's yoga mats there and you see all these masculine individuals practicing yoga? What would that do? What would a 5-year-old little boy, how would that 5-year-old little boy take that? What would that become normal to him? What would that look like? Last one, Yellow?
Yeah, so last one's just thriving families, just thinking about families receiving the support to create homes of safety, right? So what if our families have the support that we needed to cultivate safety and create like homes of care, right? Because like when I say support, the reality is that is economic support. That is also emotional support and mental health support. Being a parent, particularly in this moment, is a very difficult thing to hold. So so once again, this is just an opportunity for us to imagine like, wow, this could be possible, but what do we need to make this possible? Where families feel supported, where cycles of harm and trauma are disrupted so that people are not being treated undervalued, are not being dismissed and denied, are not being harmed, right? What would that look like? And so this tool is just our attempt to reimagine, because that's a part of our work, right? We can talk about and harp about all the issues and the challenges all day, but we have to take the time to actually figure out what is my vision and how can I help make that vision come into life wherever I am. If I'm in an educational institution, if I'm an activist, how do I interrupt these toxic concepts of masculinity that show up in all people of all genders and craft a vision of healing centered, a healing centered world, right? And so this is like what we're offering to you for us. But if you go to the next slide, you will see that we have blank ones for you all, right? So what we want to invite you all to do, we have a couple of blank ones. I think we want to send you one that has these words on it, but one that doesn't have words on it, for you to also figure out, what is your vision? How do you reimagine? What does it look like? And share those on social media and tag us at Beam.org, because we want to reshare them, because this is a collective collaborative vision that we're creating, right? And thinking about mental health, thinking about what would be needed at every particular intersection, and just imagining your biggest, boldest vision for healing for Black men and masculine communities.
Yeah. Yeah, could we hear? I'd like to hear for one or two people really quick. What does that look like for you? How would you reimagine a couple of these? What is mental health and masculinity reimagined? What does that look like to you? You can give an example of one of the five here, or you can create your own. Share with us your own.
Yeah. Let's just hear from folks. You can type or you can chat. We would love to hear from your voice. I think we'll probably finish this. This will be our last thing to do. Just spend some time for people. Just let us talk about what's your vision. What are you doing? Maybe you're doing some things already. What are you doing in your communities that's helping reimagine these frameworks? See if anybody is asking the chat up, raising your hand, saying you want to talk about that. I see Christian's hand is raised. I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you again.
Hey, Christian.
Hey, he, him, his. I imagine a world where, in particular for me, cis straight Black men are loving. And are able to be loving to each other and to the fullness of how, like the fullness and diversity of what Blackness shows up in the world. So that we're loving and caring to people who aren't just cis straight Black women, for instance, or who don't just present and show up in a certain way. And I think, at least for me, some of the work I've been engaged in is creating spaces where Black men and masculine folks are able to engage in feeling and learning, and then taking that into action. And so what does it look like for us to be in space where we're practicing our visions for the future? So if Black men, if I envision Black and masculine folks loving each other in the future, that actually means we have to be loving each other now and practicing what that actually feels like and how we do that. And so that's really what I'm excited to be engaging with, and appreciate being for creating spaces for learning and exploration.
Thank you, Christian. Wow, that was beautiful, powerful. I think I saw Oscar. I thought I saw your hand up, Oscar, but it went down. There it is. Okay, it's back again. Thank you, Christian, for sharing that piece. And we'll hear from Oscar. I'm going to unmute you now. Oscar, can you hear us? Hello? Oscar, you might be muted. I think you press *6 in case you muted yourself. Let me make sure you're not muted. Nope, you're not muted. Okay.
I'd like to read James Ford. He's in the chat.
Okay.
James Ford, thank you. He said, we ungender our son by allowing him to choose whatever he wants to do, to be present, etc. He is fully aware that he can be his full self no matter what.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, very powerful. Other folks on the line, how are you reimagining masculinity for yourself and for the people in your lives? What does that look like? What's your vision? Biggest, boldest vision? Oh, Oscar said he thinks it's a fixed issue. Hold on, I'm going back to Oscar. All righty. Are you there, Oscar? Are you there now? Nope. Wait, I see your hands raised, but I still can't hear you. Let me click on the chat box. Yep, I saw your message, and I unmuted you. Okay. So we're going to come back to you, Oscar. Still not working for some reason. But I saw another hand go up. I saw, let's see where it go. I'm going to unmute you back again. And then a lot of you all have been quiet. There's a lot of people who haven't said anything. I'm going to unmute you, Adam.
So for me, as a teacher of mostly black students, all black students typically, I see a system of ReImagined where Black children, Black students are not maligned when they walk in the door. They are protected, and their wholeness, their well-being is a priority, and not just their academic learning and fullness. Where we see less rates of suspensions, less rates of mental health identification, less rates of policing, and students feel like they feel just empowered and they feel like communal when they're in school buildings. And there's more of a sense of community among the adults as well, because we have broken adults and who are teaching our Black children. So I see a world where there's mutual respect. Children walk in the door respected, and not having to be told that they have to respect first in order to gain respect. So we just take ways. And we acknowledge the intersections of racism, transphobia, and intergenerational trauma. We recognize the intersections of all those things and how they feed and influence the mental well-being of the child and the academic well-being of the child. So holding all those things together in tandem, and in suspension and intention, but also recognizing the fullness of those things and how we can use them to leverage the fullness of the child.
Wow, thank you, Adam. That was powerful. And I love it. I like to say that like all these things are possible, right? Like all this is possible. And I think about like how people have been talking about with COVID-19, how certain things they thought were not possible are now possible, like student loans or like almost canceled for 6 months or on forbearance. People think that it's possible. There's so much that is possible in our world just because we can create it. There are things that are happening now in this moment that 50 years ago, our grandparents and our parents were like, that's never going to happen, right? Somebody would have never told me, my great grandmother might have never believed that I'd be able to start an organization that was going to help, address healing and wellness and masculinity. And I'd be like, girl, I don't know. That's nothing. That was not something that people thought was possible, right? In certain ways, right? And so just holding that particular piece as well. I know we're at 6:02, but I see Oscar wants to try one more time, so I'm going to try to unmute you. Oscar, can you hear me now?
All right. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
There you go. Yep, I can hear you.
Right.
There you go. Third time's the charm.
Third time's the charm. Well, thank you to everybody who's been sharing so far, and thank you to the interpreters as well. I've interpreted a lot in Spanish to English, English to Spanish, and I know it's a lot of work, and it's really takes a toll. So I love you, and thank you for making that access. I'm just thinking about, I've been organizing in my community in Florida, in Kansas, and Louisiana for over the last 10 years. And I've been thinking a lot about how I've sometimes, with my little niece, I will just cut to that, but just thinking about reimagining the relationships that we can grow in our families. Lately, I've been dealing with depression and waking up moody, or what some she'll call me cranky. And instead of just having her and my family, my mom, her grandma, just kind of deal with that, I'm trying to say, hey, today I'm feeling depressed, or today I'm feeling a little bit moody. And with her, it's almost like at first she was trying to avoid it, and she's 14 years old. And now it's me trying to open up the conversation. Hey, these are the things that I'm feeling. And me communicating it and saying it out loud is really scary. But I'm also saying it to let you know that I'm working on it, and I want to be accountable to it, so that grandma doesn't have to deal with it, and you don't have to deal with it from this space of taking on this extra emotional labor. So just imagining being able to share with our young girls that it is possible to name the things that we're feeling, that it is possible. And it's really funny, and it's really it's beautiful, because it's trying to reimagine how the men in our families can relate to the girls in our family. So, and I thank y'all for putting me on that path and giving me a lot more clarity and validation to be able to hold those conversations with my niece and with my mom too. It's like, hey, this is what I'm feeling, and this is how I'm handling it, including attending this webinar that then I've debriefed with her and my niece and nephews as well. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. It's so powerful and so beautiful. Like just, modeling the behavior. That's what Christian was sharing earlier, and Adam was sharing. Like, how do we model and put into action? And that's what you're doing. And I love that we also uplifted, like, when we haven't been socialized to do certain behaviors, learning to do them can feel awkward and uncomfortable at times. right? We're learning to practice strategies that we've been taught that are counter to everything that we've been trained, right? And so it can be uncomfortable. It can be disconcerting. But in that comfort, there's often an opportunity to grow, and also an opportunity to recognize that as we are practicing our active reimagining of the world, we will fail, right? We will fail, and we will make mistakes, and we will have to come back to the drawing board and be like, you know what, I drew this color. It needs to be a different shape. It is not this, right? That is a part of any creative collective unlearning or learning process is failure, and how we're able to hold that with tenderness for ourselves and for other folks is a part of the work too. I often think about when I'm out of my work, and I know we're over time, but like we can say this piece. A lot of my work, I found that we often have a lot of harsh internal voices around our emotionality that keep us kind of bottled up and shut down, right? And sometimes that internal voice has been not necessarily always our voice. It might be a voice of a caregiver. It might be a voice that we've internalized of a friend or a colleague, or we, are really hard emotionally on ourselves. And I think learning how to talk back to that self, learning how to reparent ourselves, to be that kind, tenderness, softness to ourselves internally is a part of the reimagining work, right? For all of us across the spectrum, because I believe that these traits and characteristics that are equated with masculinity in our culture really show up in all people in varying different degrees. People just have different dimensions of identification with them, right? And so I'm really holding that piece and naming that. And I saw one statement from Rose. Rose said, I reimagine masculinity as being recognized in all gendered and sex folks and not recognized as binary, Ashe, which I think is really beautiful and powerful. So we're at 6:06, recognizing that we're over time. Leroy, I think, do you have some resources you want to give to folks before we wrap up? And I also want to say that I'm willing to stay on for a couple of minutes if people have some more questions. But Leroy, go ahead. Do you have some?
For sure, yeah. So there's just some resources for everyone. Of course, we have Bell Hooks, The Will to Change. That dives deep into masculine folks' relationship with mental health, with masculinity in general. Of course, that's just the go-to for us. We also have Beam, our beam.community/find a therapist. So if you are seeking to find a therapist, find different resources for you, we have that there. You can visit that website right there. We also have this here, this graphic for you here that has some different warm lines, some hotlines, so you can get that support. We also have a couple books here, a couple more books. Brene Brown, Daring Greatly. This is a great way for us to. She talks about us being vulnerable, like how there's power in that, and how we can practice that vulnerability, like how we can be emotionally present. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk talked about trauma. We talked about how trauma shows up in our bodies, in our minds, our brains, just everywhere. So it helps us recognize and help us see where the trauma, where those emotions are showing up, so that we can go forward. So there, we touched on it, but on that graphic that we had about how traditional masculinity it shows up in mental health for masculine folks. We have sources here as well. I'll email you these sources as well, so you can take a deeper look into the statistics that show how these are showing up, how these are presented, and how they are happening in everyday life right now. So in our next workshop, Mental Health and Peer Support, we dove a little bit into today about how we can hold ourselves accountable. And this next workshop, Tuesday, May 26th, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., we're going to talk about peer support, how we can show up for others and support others in our community with mental health, and how to show up and support them with their own journey with that. Lastly, thank you so much. You can keep in contact with us, being.community/sign up. You can join our listserv and also support our work. Oops, oh my goodness. If this webinar resonated with you, we would appreciate your support. You can go to www.being.community for your donation, for donations to support and to contribute to the work that we're doing. That's all the resources I got. I'll email you more. I'll email you things like the common coping strategies. You'll get an email for that. You can download them from the handouts. I know not all the handouts are there, but we can only put 5. So I'll be sure to get you all of those later on and tomorrow. All right. And that's all the housekeeping I have. So thank you. We'll stay on for a couple more minutes. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, I was just saying we'll stay on for a couple more moments if anyone has any questions. Let's see. Will the PowerPoint be shared with us? We don't usually share our PowerPoint. Our PowerPoints, you can have we'll be sure to share with you the tools and the handouts. If there are any particular questions that you wanted or that you had, you feel free to email us or to ask right now. We'll be happy to have those conversations with you.
Yeah. So I guess like in that piece, just in closing, people, I know people are going to start dipping out of the room. Just want to say gratitude for you for being present. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your reimagining. Thank you for all the labor that you're putting out into showing up differently and unlearning generations of harm. And, we're unlearning what was taught to us, what was taught to somebody else, what was taught to somebody else. Most of the time, these things are just survival strategies, right? That aren't rooted in always malice, but are rooted in survival and coping and, maladaptive coping. So just holding gratitude for you all across the country, from Florida to Boston to St. Louis, to everybody who's out here. Thank you so much for the work that you do. We hope that the tools that we offer today and the framing, you can take those tools in your communities and have more conversations and expand the dialogue beyond us. Please share them. Please circulate them. Please expand upon them. All those pieces are really critical. And so thank you for everybody who engaged, who stayed present, and who also chatted, and who also asked questions. We appreciate you so much. So this gratitude for, as we close out. And I'll hang out for a little bit. If you have a question, you want to raise your hand, I'll still talk to you if you like. We're still here.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add on to that. Thank you, everyone, for being authentic. Thank you for staying present. This may have activated a lot within everybody. So I just appreciate everyone being here. The fact that you're here means that you care. And that is so important to reimagine in masculinity, is having folks to care and are committed to the work, because we are the work. So thank you all.
I say. That's the word, Leroy. We are the work. Also, shout out to Leroy. Leroy didn't say this, but Leroy made all these amazing graphics. Can y'all just give him a round of virtual applause for how amazing the graphics look? I mean, they all look really, really good. And he is the graphics man. He gets all those things done. He brings them to me, and we be like, let's work it out. So you have him to thank for all the pretty pictures with a good ideological explanation. Thank you, Melanie. I'm sorry.
I'd say I appreciate you too, Yolo, because you make sure that it's on point too. It may look good, but we gotta make sure it's on point too. So that the content is as good as it looks. So you help with that too. So thank you for that.
Yeah. You have a clap from the graphics from someone. Also, the Bell's quote on integrity. Someone would like to look at it. If you could bring it up on the screen again. I think quite a bit of folks who still in the room. Y'all just hanging out here. We'll see what we're gonna talk about. What y'all doing? I know y'all just hanging out in here. Feel free to ask a question. There's a lot of y'all in here still chilling.
Oscar asked if there's space. Oh, sorry. Sorry, you'll go ahead. I was gonna say, Oscar asked, is there a space like this for Latinx men? I would say we support, we center Blackness, but as well, we hold space for all marginalized communities. I'm Latinx as well. I'm Afro Afro-Latinx myself. So yeah, um, we can talk, Oscar. What's up? Let's make something. Hit us up. We create something like that. Yella, did you have anything to add to that?
No, there definitely are groups that do this work with Latinx men. I think I was thinking about, I wish I could remember. I know the name is just Latinx men for like, Latinx mental health therapy for men, but I can't think of I don't know their URLs and stuff. Let me look them up, and I can see if Leroy, before you send your email out, I can put it in there for you, and then everybody can get the access to that. But yeah, there absolutely are. There's absolutely Latinx men, specific groups who are doing this work. Asian, Pacific Islander men, Indigenous folks, all kinds of folks, and also non-binary, masculine. All folks are doing this amazing work. So absolutely, got to find them and get you connected.
Right on. Yeah, this work doesn't start with being, it doesn't end with being. So we're supporting whoever's doing the work wherever. So we'll definitely get you connected, Oscar.
Absolutely. Okay, well, everybody's still hanging out, but I think I'm going to go ahead and call it. It's been a long day. There's no other questions. Thank you all so much. Please make sure you fill that evaluation out afterwards if you have feedback for us in terms of how you experienced it. And we'll see y'all in 2 weeks for peer support, which I'm excited about.
Oh, sure. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you to MJ and Shannon as well for your work.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.